our next.
Sorry.
Welcome to this session of conscious sleep yoga. We are almost near the conclusion of this particular series. And there's so much to think about and pull together. But before we start on that journey, let us take a few moments and just center ourselves together, come together as a group and offer the class to the divine feet of Mother. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome once again. And good morning, good evening, good night. It's so nice to have this platform where people can join from everywhere and share in this beautiful gathering and sharing. So as I was mentioning that we are now in the 9th week. So 9 weeks have actually gone past. And 9 is a very mystical number. It's the number that brings together everything. It's the number of perfection, fruition. It's a very spiritual number. So today we are going to look at what is known as the powers of consciousness and the higher powers of consciousness, which Mother and Sri Aurobindo also refer to as the occult, the hidden, the latent powers. So we'll be looking into that. I'll be sharing a little bit about what higher forces or higher consciousness is. And then we'll delve into, there may not be time to go into, there are many powers, of course, at different levels, but we will examine at least 2 of them for a start. So where is this yoga of conscious sleep going? With all this, we've been talking about so many aspects of the integral yoga. How does it all fit into our practice of conscious sleep? And as I was mulling over this and meditating on the idea, it appeared that there are 2 things happening simultaneously. One is our personal effort. We take the effort to set the intention, be conscious during the day, write our journal, pay attention to our dreams. Those are all our personal effort. The second is the grace from above, which is the actual force that does the work. Now, this grace from above, what exactly do we mean by it? And how does it work? I've shared in a previous webinar that each of us is a particular force of the grace. Each and every individual is unique in that sense. The grace wants to manifest differently, uniquely, through each channel. And therefore, the path, the journey will be unique for each of us. We may all be practicing conscious sleep yoga, but the experiences will vary. The methods will vary for different people. Different methods will work at different times. And therefore, the experiences, consequences and experiences of those efforts and the working of the grace will also be different. So while we have very detailed observation, guidelines in all of Sri Aurobindo and the mother's writings, we have to really see what it is that resonates with me and is working for me. That power of discernment has to be developed. I cannot follow somebody else's experience and say, why isn't that happening to me? Therefore, is something lacking in my practice. It's not that. Like it says in the Gita, you have to follow your own dharma, your own nature. Second thing I wanted to say here before we go on to the presentation is that Sri Aurobindo has said that in the beginning, there will be a lot of experiences. But these experiences must become a realization. What is that? As we experience different kinds of experiences, we have to make it stable in the physical. We have to not just have a beautiful experience, note it down in our journal and say, oh, that was wonderful, and then move on. That experience was given to us for a particular reason. So the development of the power of intuition, discernment, why I had this experience and how I can bring it into myself, into my consciousness and work with it. So experiences are there. They are meant for realization. Otherwise, they don't mean anything much, according to Sri Aurobindo. He says experiences happen, but unless it becomes a realization fixed in your being, it really does not hold weight. So keeping these two things in mind, we'll see that the yoga of conscious sleep has many paths going into it. We have pulled together many practices of the integral yoga, many concepts, psychological, physical, emotional. We've looked at it. And now we are going to see where exactly it will lead us. What will be the conclusion? Because according to Mother and Sri Aurobindo, the nature of sleep must transform into yogic repose. What does that mean? So let us, I'll ask Vladimir, request please, if you could open up screen sharing. Yes, I see. Now, this is the topic for today, powers of consciousness and the hidden forces that work in those powers. The next slide, please. Higher consciousness. So what is the higher consciousness and what is the purpose of its descent? In Sri Aurobindo's yoga, it's not only about the ascent. There is also a descent. It's a double movement. So the higher consciousness is not a miraculous force. It can be mistaken by some people, oh, a miracle is going to happen in my life and everything will suddenly change. It doesn't work like that. It is a higher consciousness using a spiritual and supraphysical force, using a spiritual and supraphysical force to act on the physical plane directly. So it's a very strong spiritual force that comes from supraphysical planes. What are supraphysical planes? These are those higher planes which are above the physical, the vital, and the mental, the higher planes, the higher mind, the illuminative mind, the intuitive mind, the overmind planes, the supermind planes. These are the supraphysical planes. And the force is there. Therefore, one must have the capacity to receive this divine force and to sustain it in the Adhar. Adhar is the container. It's an Indian word. Adhar means a container, the container of consciousness, which is basically our life, mind, and body. That is referred to as the Adhar by Sri Aurobindo. So the capacity to receive the force into that Adhar and to sustain it, to hold it there, not to allow the experience to come and fritter away or dissipate, but to stabilize into a realization. So therefore, what does need to happen? The preparation of body, life, and mind to hold this descending force is key. Preparation, in Savitri, in Ashwapati's Yoga, Sri Aurobindo says, all he did was prepare the field. And Bhagavad Gita talks a lot about the preparation of the field. What is the field? The field is precisely this, our life, mind, and body. This is the field of our work here on this plane. So that has to be prepared for this force. We have seen the importance, therefore, working with the physical body, the physical mind. We've done all this in the previous webinars. Transformation of the gunas, we talked about that in great detail. The waking mind, the subconscious, subliminal, inner being. These are all aspects of the field in mind, life, and body. How do we use it? We practice silent mind. We practice establishing silence first in the mind. The mind is the instrument, main instrument, and the ego in the vital. These are the two forces generally we use in the lower nature to exist in the world. So what do? We practice silencing the mind. That's the first step in the yoga, the practice of silent mind, stability in the physical, getting rid of the lower vital habits and tendencies, overcoming the ego through the aspiration, surrender, calling to mother, and the concentrated will to be increasingly conscious in both waking and sleeping states. There are 3 states of the consciousness: the waking state, the sleeping state, and the deep sleep. This is across the board. It's not just because it is of conscious sleep that I'm talking about these 3 states. They exist. There's an echo coming. I don't know why. Do you get it, Radhi? Okay, now
yeah, I'm trying to get, it looks like maybe Sunita Shaman has fair. I'm trying to mute her there. There she goes, I think.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was just a mistake. I'm sorry.
No, that's no problem. So these 3 states of consciousness, the waking, sleeping, and waking, dreaming, and the deep sleep. These are the 3 states of consciousness in which we have to be conscious, more conscious than we currently are. That is the practice. And we've discussed about all the various aspects of the body, life, and mind, how we can start becoming conscious in that. Now, the aim of conscious sleep is to change the nature of sleep from the state of unconsciousness to a conscious repose. The consciousness, therefore, has to transform in all the 3 states. Only when we are more conscious in the waking state, we will be more conscious in the dreaming state. And therefore, we will be more conscious, hopefully, in the deep sleep. Currently, right now, deep sleep is a state where the consciousness goes so deep within that Sri Aurobindo says dreams are taking place, but the recording is not happening because one has gotten so deep within. But that is precisely the aim of the yoga, to be conscious even in that deep sleep state. What does it mean? It means to recognize that I'm now really in the deep sleep. And this is what I'm experiencing there. And that becomes the yogic repose, because that is not really sleep. It's a form of samadhi. There is a term that Sri Aurobindo used. It's called swapna samadhi, dream samadhi. It happens in deep meditation and in trance, deep states of trance. And that is exactly the state one takes into deep sleep. Yoga Nidra, I was looking into it. Yoga Nidra does talk about achieving that state, but it's a very high state, but it can be achieved. It's not as though it cannot. Great yogis have done it. And that is where the yoga, the practice of conscious sleep takes us, to be conscious even in that deep sleep state. And then the requirement for sleep is no longer there. The yogi just rests for a few hours or a few moments, because instantly they touch the source. As soon as they close their eyes, they know they go straight to the source. They're totally relaxed. The body gets its nourishment and its relaxation, and they come back to the waking state. So they can do that at will. At will. They can do it at any time and at will. That is the freedom that comes with that consciousness. So I know that's a very, very ambitious and a very high scale to set, but we have to have a high goal. The yoga, the aim of this yoga is to be conscious in all these three states. The transformation of nature, that is the transformation of nature, Prakriti. No longer at that point does the lower nature have a hold on you then. The grace has descended. It has completely transformed that lower nature into the higher nature. Prakriti itself transforms into her higher self at that point. So personal effort, coming back to the webinar, personal effort lies in the preparation of the container of consciousness. That is the possibility. Those are the possibilities. The descent of the higher force that actually does the work of transformation in the inner being. That transformation is the purpose. Only that highest force can transform the subconscious and the lower nature. By our own mind, it is futile even to think that we will change the subconscious. At the most, we can be aware of certain tendencies that come up in our dreams. You know, the tendency to be angry or the tendency to be confused. These tendencies show up in our dreams. And then how we interpret and understand the dream, that is another phase too. Because if we do not understand it, we wave it away and say, oh, I don't know, I just dreamt something weird and strange. It has nothing to do with my waking life, so I forget about it. No, every dream has a message and a meaning. We only have to understand how to understand the dream. And that is the opening of the consciousness. So, but we can only work so much with it. Basically, it's this higher force that descends in us. The Aadhar is prepared, and it is that which begins to work with the subconscious and transform it, transform the subconscious. And how do we know it is transforming? What are the signs? Well, there'll be certain tendencies that may still come up. I may still be subject to anger, to irritation, to jealousy, to all kinds of lower nature stuff. I may still, but the hold will be looser. It will be loose. It will not trouble you, or it will not stay with us for a long time. I won't be angry throughout the day. I may be angry for some time, and then I let go of it. I'll know how to let go of it. Even the dreams will change. The nature of the dreams begin to change. You don't get confusing dreams. You get very clear patterns. You understand them. You know what they are telling you. So the subconscious begins to transform. The tendencies begin to lose their grasp on our nature. That is how we know that the higher force is working to change the nature. And we begin to move more in the subliminal experiences. We've talked about the subliminal and the inner being. So the consciousness, we remember more. We come back, waking state, we remember more. We know what to do. That is how we know that things are changing within. But not to doubt, not to say that, I don't know if this is really happening to me. Really, it is. We can never doubt the action of the grace. The next slide, please. So this higher force acts according to the nature of the instrument. Nature of the instrument, we've talked about swabhava, the inherent nature that we have. Firstly, we are, it is prakriti, the gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, that shapes the nature. We are the victim, we are the tool, we are the puppet, and we pretty much dance to the tune of the gunas. But as we progress in the yoga, slowly the gunas, like I said, begin to lose their hold, and the true nature of the individual starts to emerge, because now we are more under the influence of the psychic. The psychic influence is coming more and more forward, and the swabhava, the inherent nature, is therefore coming to the surface. This higher force acts according to the nature of that instrument. So somebody's nature may be very artistic. Their inherent swabhava may be very artistic. They'll seek beauty through all their activities in life. They'll seek beauty in form, beauty in thought, beauty in emotion, and the higher force will bring that forth. Therefore, the importance of training and purification to be a proper channel of the force. The force acts according to certain laws and under certain conditions, not by a sudden chance or arbitrary choice. Though interventions and miraculous things do happen sometimes. Sri Aurobindo's explaining that this force acts on that swabhava. So the swabhava is a channel which is purified or moving towards purification. And the force is not a miraculous force, as mentioned earlier. It works under certain laws and certain conditions which are hidden, which are latent, which are the occult laws of nature that mankind is now seeking to explore, now coming to the fore. People are now beginning to understand the powers of clairvoyance, telepathy, certain psychic abilities, teleportation. The yogis have already spoken about this at great length. You pick up any of the older scriptures, you'll see lots of experiences of people seen in a couple of places at the same time. I remember, it suddenly comes to mind here, that when Champak Lalji was visiting somebody in the US once, and the doorbell rang, he was given a room upstairs in the house of this particular devotee. And the doorbell rang, and the lady of the house took some time to come out of the room to go towards the front door, and she saw Champak Lalji already at the door, opening the door. But then suddenly she looked upstairs, and he was also standing upstairs. So he had this ability to appear at two places at the same time. It's a siddhi. It's a siddhi that is acquired as the soul comes right in the front. So that is the nature of the instrument. So Sri Aurobindo says that miraculous things do happen. Interventions do happen where things out of the normal can be seen, observed, and experienced. So what is the nature of the instrument? The first process is to open the ranges of the inner being, the inner physical, inner vital, inner mental, subliminal consciousness. And this itself is a huge step. It's not easy to access the inner being. The renting, the veil between the outer and the inner has to be lifted, has to be opened out. And that is a huge movement in yoga. Once that happens, then you begin to live from inside outward by the inner light and force as you got closer to the psychic being. Secondly, the second movement here is opening upward and experiencing the descent of the higher force. There are many intervening ranges beyond the mind and the overmind planes, as already I said, that open up and their powers are brought into the mind, life, and body. So you might suddenly develop a new power of music or poetry or writing. New powers begin to come into the individual and new interests. Control over the body, that's what we need to do, is needs, passions, desires, impulses, and instincts. Opening of the mind to greater wideness of self. The heart's devotion, love, and surrender. And in work, turning away from the selfish motives to service of a greater reality than the ego. The inspiration of the master is indispensable here in preparation to receive the higher force. These are some of the things that is spoken about in the Gita, the karma yoga, the bhakti yoga, and the jnana yoga. And the presence of the master, the presence of the guide, as long as required, as necessary, till the psychic being or the soul comes in front. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, the descent of mother's force. Sri Aurobindo is saying, when I speak of the mother's force, I do not speak of the force of Prakriti, which carries in it things of the ignorance, but of the higher force of the divine that descends from above to transform the nature. So he makes a very clear distinction between mother's force and the lower force. The mother's force is the higher force. And the lower force, he says here, there are two things to be noted. Yoga force in its origin is that of the divine spiritual force, and the yoga force working under evolutionary conditions as a special power of spiritual consciousness. So one is the divine force and the other is the evolutionary force. These are the two forces that work as they descend. The evolutionary force works slowly and works anyhow. It is independent of our will. We don't will it. It happens. It works. That is the law. But the divine spiritual force of the mother is something that we have to aspire for, surrender to. The higher force manifests in three different ways. First, as a strength of consciousness, supporting life and action. So what does that mean, a strength of consciousness? It's an inner strength. It's an inner nature that gives you the will and the strength and the capacity to shift your nature. If you're tamas, if inertia has a greater hold on you, that tamas itself desires to shift into rajas. The instincts of inertia from within will say, get up and act. Take some action. Don't keep sitting around. You can see the tamas actually wanting to get up and move. So it's a strength of consciousness that supports life and its action. Then you know that the higher force has started shifting inside. Secondly, as a power put forth for an objective in outer life. So related to that inner shift, there is an outer shift. There's an outer shift in your external circumstances. Thirdly, as a special force drawn down to increase the scope of consciousness, transformed by a steady and organized action, it's instrument of work here. So it is this higher force that chooses the instrument through which it will work. And in that instrument, it sets about going about it in a very organized way. It doesn't happen at random. So everything works according to certain laws and certain actions. We have, what is our role? Our role is to open to the force, to surrender, and to prepare the field. That is our role. In the traditional Kundalini Yoga, it's about the ascent of the force. Now, there are many practices in Kundalini Yoga, pranayama and Hatha Yoga practices, asana practices, meditation practices, by which they force that energy, which is in the Muladhara, the Kundalini force, to awaken and rise through the Sahasrara. But in integral yoga, the process is reversed. A connection is made to the higher spiritual planes first, above the head, either through the opening provided by the psychic coming forward, or through a direct connection to higher mental planes. So there are two movements. One is inward and one is upward, by harnessing the mind. What is harnessing the mind? I mentioned one of the methods is to silence the mind. Another is to open wide to the higher forces above the head and allow the silence to descend. Experience is of a force descending from higher to lower centers. Feeling of deep peace as the force descends. In his letters to yoga, Sri Aurobindo is explaining to a devotee who asked that he feels a lot of peace as the silence descends. And he says that is the first feeling of deep peace as the force descends and the mind widens under its influence. As the higher chakras open, first the higher chakras begin to open, reveal their powers, the force descends further and adjusts the emotional and vital centers, even the physical. It begins to transform the nature so that new action and new capacities emerge. And each center, as it opens, has its own particular qualities that begin to, and capacities that begin to emerge. For instance, the Ajna chakra, the third eye, is the center of will. And it is also the center of vision. So Sri Aurobindo says in the subliminal, in the occult powers of the subliminal, in the book Powers Within, he says the psychical consciousness is that of what is now often called the subliminal self. Its first faculty is its power of seeing by the psychical sense images of all things in time and space. It is a door opened by chance or by an innate gift or some kind of higher pressure, which opens the universal mind, represented by images, even auditory images, and subtle planes become visible. So you open up to a new time consciousness, known as the triple time knowledge. So it's like you see the past, present, and future. So that is just one of the powers of the third eye center. Now, coming to the hidden forces, the mother says, the knowledge and right use of the hidden forces of nature, especially the forces of the subtle physical and the supraphysical planes, are occult forces. Everyone practices occultism without knowing it because everyone uses the power of thought and imagination, which are in fact occult or hidden, but which produce visible effect on oneself and others. The effects are meager compared to what they could be if the powers were developed through training. Become more conscious of the powers. So Mother is talking about occult powers now. We already saw some of the subtle senses, talked a little bit about it. I can't go into great detail because of the paucity of time, but hopefully someday we'll discuss these in greater detail. But some of these hidden forces that are mentioned, power of identification, what is identification and how it works, power of concentration, intuition, power of thought, power of faith, power of imagination, and there's a whole list more. I just pulled out a few. We'll go to the next slide where we'll talk about the power of identification. Sri Aurobindo says, it all depends on where the consciousness places itself and concentrates itself. If you place it on being a separate self, ego sense, with knowledge, we become aware of and identify with the psychic being. So if we place our consciousness in being separate, we are coming from the ego, whereas we can identify with the psychic. Not till the psychic is felt as yourself that you can be an individual. Till then, we are only a clash of forces. So we truly become an individual when we are actually at one with the psychic self. Then further, to know something, the consciousness divides itself in two. One is through the movement of identity, where you become the thing. The example given, you identify totally with anger. Then you say, I am anger. Because at that point, you're right in the middle. You're caught up with the forces of anger. Movement of differentiation is when you stand apart and you realize, I am angry. So there's already a distance. A distance has happened and you're standing away from that angry movement and you can see yourself, the outer nature being angry. You're not identifying with it, but you can see it separately. There is a slight partial differentiation. So we always seek to identify in our attempt always in transformation of nature is to identify with the higher movements of nature and disengage identification with the lower nature. Constantly, that should be the practice. Now, Mother gives us an exercise in identification. She says, take a problem or a thought and objectify it in your mind. See it as an object outside yourself. Use exact, precise, and clear terms to describe it. Then concentrate on it till nothing else exists. So the entire focus is on that particular statement or problem. All of a sudden, you are on the other side. You have opened a door in your consciousness and now have the solution. She also gives us an option. She says, try it when you have an argument with another person. Let go of the ego and identify yourself with the other completely. So it's as if you step into their shoes. You will see their point of view with no conflict in your mind. And in this way, You can identify with flowers, with animals, objects, ideas. It is an excellent practice in widening oneself and gaining direct knowledge of another. This power of identification. It goes into great detail. You can, if you have the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo's, he gives you a lot of explanation in that. Powers within, then Life Divine, Letters on Yoga, all of them talk about the power of identification and how to practice it. I would like here to share from Prayers and Meditations of the Mother on April 7, 1917. Mother is writing in her book, "A deep concentration seized on me, and I perceived that I was identifying myself with a single cherry blossom." Mother was in Japan at that time. Then, through it, with all cherry blossoms. And as I descended deeper in the consciousness, following a stream of bluish force, I became suddenly the cherry tree itself, stretching towards the sky like so many arms, its innumerable branches laden with their sacrifice of flowers. Then I heard distinctly this sentence, quote, "Thus hast thou made thyself one with the soul of the cherry trees. And so thou canst take note that it is the divine who makes the offering of this flower prayer to heaven," unquote. When I had written it, all was effaced. But now the blood of the cherry tree flows in my veins, and with it flows an incomparable peace and force. What difference is there between the human body and the body of a tree? In truth, there is none. The consciousness which animates them is identically the same. Then the cherry tree whispered in my ear, quote, "It is in the cherry blossom that lies the remedy for the disorders of the spring," unquote. So this was Mother's experience when she identified completely with the cherry tree. Those are the powers of identification, complete identification. All right, we go to the next slide, please. The next power, these are occult powers. Mother identifying with the cherry tree, feeling the blood of the cherry tree in her veins, the cherry tree whispering to her. These are the hidden powers, and we can all identify with the flower, with the tree, with the bird, with the animal, with another human. Power of concentration. Central to yoga of knowledge is the power of concentration. Swami Vivekananda identifies concentration as the art and science of Raja Yoga. And if you have Swami Vivekananda's book, the extensive explanation on concentration and its powers, and you'll be amazed at the powers that can come up with the power of concentration. You can open up entire realms, different worlds. Sri Aurobindo says, purity is the condition in which the concentration becomes entire, rightly effective, omnipotent. Purity and concentration are feminine and masculine, passive and active, of the same status, Therefore, the two must proceed together. This is something so new that I thought I really must share it, because I didn't know this. Really, I didn't know this. That you need inner purity for the concentration to be perfect. And that purity is the feminine aspect and concentration is the masculine. One is passive and the other is active, but the two have to go together. It's like Purusha and Prakriti, or Shakti and Ishvara, Ishvara and Ishvari. By thought, we dissipate ourselves in phenomena. It is by gathering back of thought into itself that we must draw ourselves back into the real. This is the process. So then there are three powers of concentration. First one is we are able to know anything whatsoever. Whatever we focus on with full concentration, like Mother told us about identification. She taught us how to identify. Then the thing we identify with, it delivers up its secrets. So it no longer remains a mystery. Because you identified, we became one with that. So when we become one with the psychic being, then there's nothing else left to do. We only move forward. Because you get all the psychical consciousness, the powers. You live within in the psychic. So then what could trouble such an individual? Second, the whole will can be gathered up for acquisition of an object. So when you have a power of concentration and you've seen these cities, a yogi concentrates and suddenly he can produce a flower in his hand where there was no flower. The object manifests itself miraculously and then demanifests also. So what is happening? The whole will is being gathered up for the acquisition of the object. But Sri Aurobindo gives us the object here. He says, please gather up your whole will for the acquisition of knowledge. That is worth having, not material objects, though that becomes possible. Third, we can become whatever we choose. So the power to enter another's mind. For instance, you can enter another's mind and know what they are thinking. And if you can do that, then maybe you can even influence them. So it's a double-edged sword. All these powers actually have both ends to it, depending on where we are in our consciousness. And that's why Sri Aurobindo insists on purity. Purity of intention, of feeling, inner purity, so that we don't misuse these siddhis. So he gives us the goal. He says we can become whatever we choose. Please choose to be just pure being. The process is to still the mind, stand back from all mental reactions and actions, reject thought suggestions, concentrate the will on transformation of nature. So this is the power of concentration. The process is much more in depth. I've just pulled out a few salient features. There's lots on concentration. I didn't know actually what exactly to pull out. Apart from what I personally practice in my own practice is what I put there actually. Stilling the mind, standing back from the mind completely, rejecting all thought suggestions, and just concentrating the will. For conscious sleep, I set the will on being conscious throughout the night. Of dreams, of experiences, of the stages of sleep. Three things: dreams, experiences, stages of sleep, and to remember it on waking. That is important, but that becomes a habit after some time. You don't have to make an effort to remember. Remembrance becomes it. So I'd like to close here from a passage from Savitri. It is the power of concentration, where Savitri, and this is Savitri's Yoga, the book of yoga, book 7. And Savitri has reached the cosmic consciousness through her yoga. So what is it that she experiences? Book 7, Canto 7, page 556. She was a single being, yet all things. The world was her spirit's wide circumference. The thoughts of others were her intimates, their feelings close to her universal heart. Their bodies, her many bodies, kin to her. She was no more herself, but all the world. Out of the infinitudes, all came to her. Into the infinitudes, sentient she spread. Infinity was her natural home. Nowhere she dwelt. Her spirit was everywhere. The distant constellations wheeled round her. Earth saw her born. All worlds were her colonies. The greater worlds of life and mind were hers. All nature reproduced her in its lines. Its movements were large copies of her own. She was the single self of all these selves. She was in them, and they were all in her. This first was an immense identity in which her own identity was lost. What seemed herself was an image of the whole. She was a subconscient life of tree and flower, the outbreak of the honeyed buds of spring. She burned in the passion and splendor of the rose. She was the red heart of the passion flower, the dream white of the lotus in its pool. Out of subconscious life, she climbed to mind. She was thought in the passion of the world's heart. She was the Godhead hid in the heart of man. She was the climbing of his soul to God. The cosmos flowered in her. She was its bed. She was time and the dreams of God in time. She was space and the wideness of his days. From this she rose, where time and space were not. The superconscient was her native air. Infinity was her movement's natural space. Eternity looked out from her on time. So that was Savitri's cosmic consciousness attained through identification and concentration. Thank you. If there are any questions or anybody wants to share, we have a few minutes.
Thank you very much. On concentration was very, very important part. And in the Upanishads, Sri Aurobindo describes the mind, and the major power of the mind, manas, is the power of concentration. Basically, everything what rotates around the mind is this power to focus consciousness on whatever object or subject or idea or self. It can refocus consciousness on whatever objectives and hold it there. We do not have enough power to hold it there. That power can be developed, but we are constantly shifting our consciousness by the mind. It's this mind which is fixing it on some objects. But to receive that deeper power, greater power to hold there, is actually the whole Yoga Sutras are about this, how to arrive at this total concentration. And through all this process of pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and finally samadhi, full identification, where there is no more gap between me and the object on which I fixed my consciousness by the mind. Consciousness is fixed by the mind. This is the major faculty, which we also in our faculties of consciousness examine. Thank you very much. It was very, very useful.
Thank you, Vladimir. Don has his hand. Don, you'll have to unmute.
Thank you for a wonderful class. Just had one quick comment. I find this distinction between purity and concentration immensely helpful in going to sleep. So if there's insufficient purity, you may, by a force of will, a very intense will, push yourself and end up making yourself more tense and having trouble going to sleep. If there's this very sort of open, receptive purity, but no focus, you'll be all kind of get lost in your dreams. And if there's this kind of deep, I think who was talking in the beginning? Someone was talking about the difficulty of relaxing before sleep. If you find, it was beautiful how you said we each have our own methods, but if you find what works for you to deeply relax, and you can maintain kind of effortless, open, but focused concentration, it's really, really interesting what you can see as you shift from, beta to alpha to theta to delta.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you. Purity and concentration, really excellent.
Thank you. Jayashree. Jayashree, you have to unmute. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This was very beautiful.
Thank you for being there.
I just wanted to maybe share that this purity and concentration is very important. Because when you love something, the swabhava, I'll come back.
Okay. Anybody else want to share anything?
Jayashree, I just had a quick question. You had mentioned the three important things as being dreams, knowing the dreams, remembering your dreams, your experiences, and then the stages of dreams. So what do you mean by stages of dreams?
Stages of sleep. Stages of sleep. Mother says that as we are going into sleep, there are different stages. Mm-hmm. First stage being the complete relaxation of the physical body and mind, with the intention entering the sleep state, becoming aware of the dream state. That is another stage, that now I am dreaming. So you are stepped back. You are in the witness position all through the night, where you see the body going through the different stages of sleep, all the way till it touches the Satchitananda and then the return journey to the waking state. There are different stages. So to be conscious of the stages of sleep. And like Vladimir just shared, the concentration, sleep turns into complete concentration. It's a form of concentration that you maintain in sleep, where you are with the mind. You are stationed in the inner self, in the inmost being which never sleeps. And you're so concentrated, you watch the stages take place.
I see. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can I come back now?
Yes, of course.
Now that I'm more focused. I was just going to say that this purity and concentration touched a very deep string in me, because I found that not only in sleep, but in your swabhava, what you love to do. Like for me, I love to cook. And I see, it just came to me when you were talking, that my swabhava is to serve the food with Mother's grace through these hands.
Superfood.
It's that concentration and the focus of the divine.
Yes.
And that helps in opening up the different channels of possibility in us.
Yes.
I thank you so much, dear sister.
Oh, thank you.
Love you so much.
Sweetheart. Thank you for sharing.
There is one more big topic which we kind of bypassed, is the ascent and descent. And the descent is the major power of this yoga. And many people do not speak about it, or do not have enough maybe experience of it, or maybe don't want to speak about this. Depends. But this is the very thing which actually drives the whole attempt. And it is interesting then what happens then when the descent takes place and takes hold of you for a long time, for years. And so what happens is the transformation is taking place gradually, because this force cannot transform everything. Only that which is ready, preparing another part meets the resistance of another part, and so on. And there are so many parts, and there's so much to do, and so much resistance also, not only from our side, but from the rest of the nature which tries to participate in ourselves, enters into our being and starts holding some, obstacles. Proposing different scenarios, which we also many times take, and then we see that it was also good because it was gradually transformed. But literally, it takes long journey. And the whole life is going like maybe 30, 40 years of this constant ongoing invocation of this force, receiving it, losing it, receiving it, meeting with obstacles, and again and again and again, crumbling down all those stones within us.
Mm-hmm.
And it is not for everyone, maybe, because there is no benefit from it whatsoever. You become transforming station. You're doing the work which even not for yourself, as it were. Of course, there is some bliss, some peace, which is granted for you with this force, some grace which protects you, and so on. But from the point of view of that excitement of life, what people think life is, it's a totally different path. And not everybody is maybe agreeing to go that route. This is what I wanted maybe to say. Don't know why I did this, but well.
No, that was very important to hear that. Because I think it separates you from the vital. That the excitement of life, you see all around you how people are leading their lives. There's so much going on in everybody's life. But as you say, when the descent begins to work and it takes many, many years and it's slow and it takes a long time and there's so much resistance, you see yourself changing and you see you can't really participate in the excitement, the so-called excitement that motivates and stimulates life in general all around you. And in that sense, I think it's the vital that begins to agree to let go of its hold. And that brings the peace and the calm also.
Exactly. And it is not a hasty process. That's what I wanted to say. It's not something within a few years you achieve something and you have it. It's not this type.
No. It starts at a particular point in life and then you turn around and many years perhaps pass by. That's what you mean, perhaps, that it takes a long time. Because this nature also has been developed over so many lifetimes that it can't really transform, miraculously, like Sri Aurobindo says. It works according to certain laws and under certain conditions.
It would be wonderful if we could bring this transformative power into the dream state. That would be a big achievement.
But that is exactly what happens with the grace. It transforms the nature of dreams. We cannot transform it with the mind. We cannot. We can only prepare ourselves and set the intention and the will that we should be conscious in the dream. But having said that, dreaming per se is an important part in the beginning of the sleep yoga, but later you can see that it is only superficial. It's not really important. That's why Mother and Sri Aurobindo said, please understand why you're dreaming and what it means and all the rest of it, but don't get stuck at the dreaming level. Because the dream transforms into experience. And that's what in conversations, not conversations, Adventure of Consciousness. No, I don't know. I'm not going to give the wrong book. But over there,
Conversations
he
with
talks about,
Pavitra, you mean?
yeah, the sleep turns from sleep of action to sleep of experience. Because the nature of the dream changes. It's no longer things that are happening in the surface consciousness, but things that are happening in different planes where you are traveling and experiencing there with those forces. So the dreams, they transform because of the action of the grace and the higher power that enters the inner being.
Dawn wants to say something.
Yeah, you inspired me to think of one more thing I found very practical and helpful over the years. One of the great exercises you've been teaching us, Jayashree, is to remember to step back into the witness pose during the day. And I find if you happen to become conscious in the ordinary dream state, in those superficial dreams, and rather than, like you say, rather than trying to control or do something to open to the grace, and then step back into the witness pose, then it becomes something else. So it's really helpful. I find it helpful to remember during the day, at night as you're going to sleep, and then in the dreams, if you're aware, that just stepping back into that quiet mind.
Yes.
I was just telling someone that for me, the whole yoga for me is 4 words: quiet mind, open heart. Step back into the quiet mind, open heart, and she does the rest.
Thank you. Thank you.
There is something which I wanted also to clarify, because in my case, it's a bit, to quiet the mind is quite a task, yeah? To make it silent is impossible really by your own force. Yeah. In my case, I'm speaking about myself. I tried everything. So you can start observing, you can follow the methodology by Sri Aurobindo given to us, how to look at these thoughts, observe them, not involve with them, see them passing, not being engaged, and slowly you will get that witnessing part within yourself. This is possible, very difficult, but possible. And not easy at all to separate mind on the observing part and the active part, and not to participate in the active part. And causes a lot of troubles. But what I notice with this process, there is some interference taking place, what we call grace, yeah, or that trying to find the witness, we find the force from above. And that force from above really quiet and makes mind quiet and silent. And it is just to give oneself to that force that the mind is being quiet. And there is one more thing which I wanted to say, that which is not mentioned in our course for some reason, that the concentration over the head, yeah, we spoke about this once or something, is a very powerful tool. Not quieting the mind, but trying to rise above and find that support which will help us to silence the mind. Because silencing without rising above the head,
No, you can't.
it's very difficult, at least.
Yeah, it can't happen while you're in this.
Mhm.
You have to go above.
Mhm.
You have to turn upwards.
Mhm.
Not only go above, but turn up.
Yeah, and fix
Fix-
oneself there.
Yes, fix up oneself in that position.
Right.
And the silence descends. We don't have to do anything. We just open and wait. The silence descends. We can't pull at it. Just the intention in the heart and the upward opening is required.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Don't.
Well, this is real. This is where your caution that we all have different ways.
Yes.
It's very important. I never, ever found, I always found initially that above the head concentration very unpleasant. And I've been reading, I've been hearing this widening, heightening, and deepening. It's one of those cliches everyone quotes, right? And one day someone said, do it. Stop talking about it, do it. And I did that widening, and the mind was instantly silent. So, and that was for me, instantly. And I find I would suggest this for anybody. When you're later, try the widening and notice as soon as you start shriveling, the mind starts getting active like a fish out of water. And when you begin to widen to that ocean, this is for me. Someone else might find the big toe might be the key. Who knows?
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I think we close for today. I will be sending out a questionnaire later in the week, a kind of a worksheet where I'll request everybody to put in their feedback, basically, about the course, because next Sunday will be our last class. We will pull it all together. And please take time to contemplate and fill up the worksheet that I'll be sending out. And then please feel free to share. I would love to invite feedback in the last session, and that will help us to think about what to do next step for the conscious sleep yoga. So thank you all very, very much. Let us take a few moments and just gather in the heart with gratitude. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you, Jayashree. Yes. Thank you, Mother. Thank you, Jayashree. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.